Hello and welcome to another episode of FinTech Focus TV, powered by Harrington Starr, global leaders in financial technology recruitment. Head over to harringtonstar.com where you'll be able to see some of the greatest jobs in financial technology recruitment across the world. You'll also be able to find a host of insight to help you grow your brand, your team, your network and your career. You can see the latest financial technology salary survey. You'll be able to download the issue of the Financial Technologist, focusing on the appetite for disruption. And our latest Top 1% Workplace Awards will be out at the end of this year. If you work for a company that's a great place to work in financial technology, we want to hear from you. Enjoy the show, and I'll see you soon. Hello, and welcome to another episode of FinTech Focus TV with me, Toby Babb. Today, joined live in the studio is Howard Wimpory. How are you?
Hi, good to meet you.
Lovely to see you. Thanks so much for coming in.
Pleasure.
Encompass is a business I've heard a lot about over the years, and seem to regularly be out and about there in the press, and lots of exciting things happening with the business.
Yeah.
We've had a chat last week, found out a little bit more about your role, your background. I love the poacher turned gamekeeper sort of piece that we're going to be talking about a little bit as well. We've got loads to be getting into today. It seems like a really exciting time for the business as well. So I'm looking forward to getting into all of that.
Yeah.
But before we do it, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am 4 decades as an operations guy working for a big bank in the UK, and part of my time also in Africa. Okay. I left there 2 years ago, having completed 4 decades of that, and it was a bit like dog years, you know. In particular operations, they go on. So 40 years was enough. I wanted to find something else to do, something else that reused those experiences, but didn't have the overhead of running the operation. Yeah. And came across Encompass, which is a wonderful piece of software, which I think addresses a very pertinent problem that most banks have got. Yeah. So I started at Encompass 2 years ago as a transformation director. And
give us the sort of headlines of Encompass as well, because it's a company, as I say, that most people have heard of before. But tell us a little bit more about the business.
So it's a business that's been going for 10 years now. Originally formulated in Australia by 2 guys called Wayne and Roger. They formulated out of personally negative experience of finding out they were dealing business with the wrong people. So it's a business which is focused on establishing the owners of the ultimate beneficial owners of corporates. Yeah. That's its point. It does that through the use of all kinds of automated searches of integrated databases. We don't have any data of our own. We access other people's databases, and we can automate the search and discovery of UBO information. And we do that. So that's a process which goes on today by lots of people pressing keys and swiveling from one system to another system to do it. We can do that in a fraction of the time.
It's an amazing development, isn't it, that? Because I've known people and companies who've been in that space for a long time. Did you say sort of like swiveling from one screen to another and the deep dive of it, to be able to I'm always fascinated by efficiencies in this industry, and I think the ability to go in there and find out that extra information in a far more pragmatic sort of way is so integral to it. Yeah. And I also love your sort of background, as you say. Look, there's not too many people I talk to who've done 40 years in an organisation, or 4 decades in an organisation, but to do that and actually have been on that side and then move into a company like Encompass, that's got to be a really fascinating sort of journey for you, hasn't it? And the last 2 years, I imagine, has been a period of accelerated learning after 40 years of somewhere where you must have been almost autopilot in everything you do. Yeah. Tell us what you've seen from, and I guess the sort of unique vantage point you have of that, because there won't be too many companies or people who can have that sort of ability to know exactly what.
Thank you. And I found it quite refreshing. I found it refreshing and invigorating to be on the other side, because I am generally learning stuff every day. I'm learning a lot about the commercials of a business that I was previously pretty much insulated from in operations. You have a kind of a mono-dimensional view when you're in operations, as opposed to the multi-dimensional that you get in this great organisation I'm part of now. I'm able to I guess the simple way of describing it is I walked in their shoes. So I understand the pain of the process they operate in. I understand the environment they operate in, and some of the pain points and the overheads that and disciplines that requires. And also come from the other angle where I know I've got a solution for a problem that they're staring at. So I guess I can combine the two things together to help the clients organise themselves so that they can get the investment funding that's required to make the purchase, to solve the problem, and helping them sort of navigate that, having, as I say, having walked in their shoes, having, you know, the overhead of all of that bureaucracy sometimes on their shoulders.
I think that walking in the shoes is such an important part of it, isn't it? And right at the offset, you said how the founders had launched Encompass because of a problem which they felt. Yeah. And I think that's a real sort of golden thread of all the companies who I think are doing really good stuff in a business, because it's not just here's a problem, we're going to be pushing it onto it and trying to latch it through. It's like, this was our problem. Yeah. We know how it felt, and this is why we're so passionate about solving it for for companies alike. And I guess from your position, that must be a really good vantage point.
It is, and I mean, frankly, when I stopped working for the big bank, I didn't need to carry on working, but I chose to because I do believe in the product, and I know that this solution will make the process more efficient and much more effective too, because whilst previously this process has been administered by following slavish desk processes, everybody has an off day, and a machine doesn't. So once you program it, it just keeps going and going and going. So you get a better outcome on so many different levels than an analyst can do just on their own. And the other part that I was really passionate about was actually trying to take the role of a KYC analyst away, actually making them do what it says on the tin. Analysing. Because 80% of their current job in a manual world is actually not analysing, it's searching. Searching and recovering and data transposition, which is all a bit boring, really. So I wanted
not potentially the best use of that sort of
no, not at all. And you end up recruiting and paying for the 20%, which is the analytics. But actually 80% of that is lowballed by doing some pretty mundane stuff. It's very important stuff, but it's not what you're really paying that resource to do. So I much rather favour a colleague proposition for our clients that's actually giving them a job which has got all the laborious work done, but the fun stuff left, which is, okay, now analyse this and make some decisions based upon the intel that's presented to you, rather than spending all your time pretty much gathering the information and probably not spending as much time on the analytics.
I love this idea of you having been in an organisation for as long as you have, and then saying, right, okay, I don't have to go and do something else now, but I want to. When you looked at that and you thought, right, this is my time to move on from it, what was the I guess compelling proposition at Encompass? Was it an absolute no-brainer for you? What attracted you to say this is something which I've got to be involved in?
Two things, and one I did know of the firm because I had some dealings with them in my previous life. So the product, I knew the product and I believed in the product. But
which is so important.
It absolutely is as important as this one great piece of advice that was given to me, particularly when looking for future opportunities, the culture of the firm. Make sure that you have 100% alignment with the culture, because frankly, in the position that you find yourself in, you don't need to be there. So make sure you want to be there. And if there's not an alignment of culture, then it's not going to work. And I continue to be blown away by the culture of this firm. There's no hierarchy. It's very, it's diverse in a slightly, I guess, slightly less corporate way in terms of it's not about gender or ethnicity. It's about diversity of thought, different experiences coming together with a focus on trying to provide an outcome which is singular in its nature. There's no infighting between different departments, no hierarchies. It's just, there we go. Is this going to make money for the firm? Is it good for the client? Yes and yes. That's the deal.
Because I think it's so interesting that you say that, because there are so many people who come out of corporates who've spent that sort of time into it, who actually struggle when they come into those sort of flatter.
It can be quite daunting.
Exactly, and it's so different in terms of the procedures and what you can rely on, and even missing some of the politics which people are so desperate to get rid of at certain stages. And actually, I think you're so right that actually looking at the people behind the organisation is just as important as having a great product, because I see a lot of people jumping into it based on that, but actually thinking and saying, right, what's the dynamic here? And it's great that you've come in there and found it. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about was the role itself. So transformation, I think, is a really interesting I guess, phenomenon. It's an area there which people talk about a lot. There's a lot of transformation professionals in financial services, but I think sometimes it's just guardian of a gradual sort of slope of improvement in terms of various different areas. But true transformation, I think, has got such an opportunity, particularly in this space, and particularly within banks, where I think it's probably been arguably a little bit slower to see genuine transformation. I think we've seen evolution over years, and I think we've probably seen pockets at various different phases of evolution. But I think technology over the last 10 years has provided a real opportunity to do things better. And I think the pandemic probably gave the shot in the arm that it needed to actually get in bed with things like cloud, etc., which I think would have taken a lot longer to really caught fire if it hadn't been for that. So if we look at banks themselves and say, why is transformation needed? Tell us a little bit about that from someone who's been on both sides now.
Okay, so you're right. I mean, transformation is somewhat of an overused description. It can be just incremental point solutions. It can also be properly transformational. And I pretty much come from the corporate side of the bank. Always looked into the retail side of an organisation and think they've actually done transformation. When you think about the banking experience as a two-legged person. Now, you want to open up a bank account now, you don't have to go and walk into a branch. You can download an app and you can do your little video and scan your passport, bank account, card comes. I mean, a completely and utterly revolutionised onboarding experience. You're right.
It can still be terrible though at the same time, particularly business banking.
Yes. So once you get beyond two-legged individuals, it becomes an area of complexity, which is why, in my view, that the corporate KYC activity has hitherto not been touched because it's difficult, right?
For right reasons.
Yes, it is difficult. It's complex, and unless you've got some enforcement undertaking from a regulator breathing down your neck, you might sit there and go, well, it's good enough. Let's not worry too much about it. But your point about the technology now enabling a much easier transition is absolutely true. And cloud, we're a SaaS solution, so that opportunity to quickly implement. Our entry to the market for our clients is a user interface and a web address. Give them a client log on. I mean, they can be up and running within 6 weeks. And most of that is testing on their side. Actually, the setup of these things is really quite straightforward. Think back to the days when it was on-prem and all sorts of coding and hardwiring into systems. I mean, so the barrier to consider changing it, those barriers are starting to fall away. And the entry is getting easier and easier to achieve. And there is a lot to be said for it. And the other point that's really struck me in the last few years is that compliance and the cost of compliance, because that's what it is. I mean, it depends who you speak to. It'll be described as a tax on the sales office, or it's just an overhead. It's the cost of doing business. I think the sanctions imposed after the Ukrainian war, or as a result of the Ukrainian war and the invasion by Russia, that's really taught people how important having really good data, agile data is, because suddenly people will wake up going, well, what's my exposure? And you realise that if you've got records full of paper that explain who your clients are, you're nowhere. You've got to have database information that is infinitely manipulable, and bring out all those right data attributes. So I think it's been a really good. So my view is the time is right for transformation. Appetite's right. Appetite, because it's become more difficult. The consequence of non-performance are greater. Cost of carrying on doing it the same old way getting even more expensive, because those analysts we referred to earlier, they're getting fewer and farther between. There's been offshoring. Then you get into a race for talent. Wherever you end up building an offshore centre, somebody else comes and builds one next door. And the cost just goes up and up. So the original driver for doing it lower cost, actually that evaporates in 10 years.
And then you've still got as to whether it's the same quality at the same time, isn't it?
So automation is the answer. The question for me is only at what point do organisations have the appetite and the will to make that step.
And the vision. You're right there. When you talked about compliance there being it's effectively a cost, it reminds me, I can't boast your 40 years, but I'm not too far behind in terms of where we go. Where I remember 20, 25 years ago, IT as a whole was seen as a cost, and people then started to evolve over 5-10 years to see it as the trading advantage.
Yes.
And that goes down to even going back to the whole more recently as the race to zero latency and the advantage that people get through there.
Yes.
Right now, I think people who are seeing compliance in a similar sort of way to where they saw tech probably 20 years ago, and data to an extent as well, where I think other sectors, I say this all the time on this show, but I think other sectors are ahead of the game on data compared to where the financial services is.
Definitely.
And if they, with the huge volume of data and the opportunity within compliance, forget just the cost saving element of getting it right and avoiding fines, etc., but actually the ability to manoeuvre quicker and faster solutions, I think is a major plus in terms of where transformation can come to.
And you're right. I mean, for us, as I was having a conversation with a French bank only this morning, the foundation of a transformed business is data.
Yeah.
I see data as the fuel of a great machine.
Yeah.
If you can build all the components, but you've got dodgy data, it's not going to work well. It's like having water in your fuel. You're the best car in the world. It's never going to work well. Data is that fuel that will, and being curious about the data that you do require rather than the data you've just got. That's another really big foundation stone. So every conversation I have with a client talking about this first step of focusing on data, it's don't just digitize what you got.
Yeah.
You've got to strip it right back to the base and say, of this, what do I need? Because compliance has been a risk-averse organisation for very good reason, for a long time. With every new regulation comes more data, and they've just layered upon layered upon layered. And no one really understands why some of the stuff they've got is required. It just is.
Yeah.
So you've got to be really curious and take it straight right back to what's the base regulation, what's our policy, and then build up the data set that supports that execution.
Absolutely.
And actually the really cute clients are the ones that are reducing their data load, but being absolutely crystal clear on why they're collecting it and which one of them they really care about. And
turn it into action afterwards.
Yes.
Right? That's the other side of it. So there can be great data collection, there can be great data visualization, but when it informs the strategy and people take action around it, that's where the magic really happens.
Yeah.
I want to touch on the KYC piece that you spoke to, and specifically about PKYC, which you guys have been talking quite a lot about recently. And that sort of comes into the Encompass maturity model as well. Tell us a little bit about that and what you guys are doing in the space.
So I'll have a brief 30-second lesson just so that everyone starts from the same position. So KYC, hitherto a manual process, pretty much works on the basis when you've onboarded a client, you've got to get them into the organisation, make sure that they fit your risk appetite. Once they're in, you have this refresh cycle. Depending on how they were risk rated, you either refresh them typically once a year, once every 3 years, or once every 5 years. That just creates this, you can imagine you've got this flow of new clients and a stock that's ever growing of existing clients, and the cost to oversee that just gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And then along comes the opportunity now with technology to be much smarter about that. The pivot of Perpetual KYC is rather than pick up every file to sift through everything to find those where there has been a change. Actually, Perpetual KYC, it turns the whole thing on its head and it looks to automate the searching, the delta analysis, the materiality assessment, and then by exception says, there you go, Mr. Analyst, Mrs. Analyst, there's a case, there's change in there, go look at it. So it allows them to focus on just putting their efforts into cases where there is a change, it's been identified. And again, all the hard, laborious work has been removed from them. So Perpetual KYC is a way of turning this cyclical refresh machine into an exception-based review process that has the change identified for you. It takes a long time to achieve it, but that's the dream.
And it's a really interesting sort of view of that as well, isn't it? Because it makes absolute sense. This is a, the word I sort of commonly use is iterative, and we see a lot of iterative change in financial services. And I think sometimes something that's here today is a different world tomorrow, and we're seeing that with ever increasing volatility for all the reasons you've mentioned earlier on. It makes it a really fascinating piece. So that sort of PKYC thing comes on as and sort of ties into the maturity. that you're talking about.
Yeah, so let me pick up that second strand about the maturity model. So I'd say 2 years ago, lots of people were talking about perpetual KYC or continuous KYC. There's lots of different descriptions, but it all means the same thing. I guess within 12 months, everyone went, well, that sounded really good. I'd like a bit of that. And then now everyone's saying, I'm convinced I want to do it. How the hell do I go about doing it? So one of the things that Encompass has done to try and help drive this is we formed an advisory board with based here in London 18 months ago that drew players in the market, consultancies, banks, data providers, CLM providers, everybody with a vested interest in, and said basically, we're going to provide some vision for the market to follow here, because it's a path everyone wants to go down but doesn't know it is quite, there was no map. So what we did was created that map of what needs to be true to achieve PKYC.
Yeah.
And we've condensed that into this maturity assessment that we can undertake with clients now that helps them assess their starting position against 5 key criteria. And that enables clients to focus on where they need to start their journey, what gaps they've got, and how many steps they've got to go through, how many iterations. Because PKYC it's probably it's very much like climbing Everest. If you get to the summit, absolutely amazing. You're in a very small cadre of people in the world that have done that. Base station 1, 2, and 3 are still significant achievements with real benefits, and that's what this maturity assessment enables clients to do, is to work out what their staging posts are, what needs to be true to go from this to that, from that to that, and then to the nirvana state. And it's something we've been rolling out this year. I've undertaken 3 of these assessments already with clients in the last couple of months, and it's been a very, very interesting conversation.
I bet it was. Yeah.
Sometimes it reinforces their thinking. That's a brilliant outcome.
Yeah.
Sometimes it awakens them to things they just haven't given any thought to.
Yeah. Which I guess is also brilliant.
It is really, really helpful. And the third thing that it does is really, it brings into sharp focus how the solution and the components that need to come together aren't necessarily all in the purview of any one provider. So this, for Perpetual KYC, is a collaborative enterprise that you will have some clients that want to build some of the components, some that want to buy all of them, but no one's got everything. There's no one vendor that's got a solution out there, no one bank that's got the capability of building it all. Encompass sees itself in a fortunate position as we see ourselves as a constant throughout the life cycle of maturing, moving from a manual model to this perpetual model, because we provide that external access to the data, and that combination of vendors collaborating is a first in this part of our industry. Pretty much everyone previously thought people were going to be eating each other's lunch, and everyone's realised now actually we're stronger together.
Well, this is the new world, right? So you know, call it collaboration, interoperability, all of those sort of things. It's gone from the sort of enterprise technology which people have to adapt to a world where people are looking for individual specialists to allow them to solve a problem. And I think the maturity, if that's not a patronising word to use for it, of people actually recognising that it's not about eating your lunch, but actually providing the best possible service and being specialists in their in their lanes. I think that's a really important piece to come out. And I'm really actually encouraged that we've seen. I think if I look at a few of the major boom roles of the last few years, partnerships has been one of them. Products obviously been another. Data, have been in there as well. But that partnerships thing, I think, is incredibly important. And the fact it's been taken as a serious role now within the vendor community, I think is a really positive.
And I would say. I've seen even in my brief tenure at Encompass, the partnerships aspect and the pipeline that it is developing is very significant to where it was 2 years ago.
It works well for all parties. It's a no-brainer as far as
and I think a client that's really, if a client's looking to buy us just to base zero, perhaps they don't need that collaborative. But if the partner, or if the client, is looking to move towards a PKYC, they can't do it with one vendor. You have to have a way of making it easy to work with for clients to buy. So we have established strategic partnerships with everybody that's required to make this thing work.
And you must recognise that as well from having been on the other side for so long. That I think there's a lot of naivety about how people sell to large banks. And what I mean by that is they'll go in there and they'll be really furious about how long it's taking. They'll be furious about the procurement processes that go in there, and it's always a surprise. Whereas actually, if you look back through it, it's about multiple sponsors. It's about making it as easy as possible, having all of the legals that are necessary in place, and all those things for obvious reasons and important reasons at the same time to take those on. Because if that disappears, as quickly as it's arrived, there's a problem for people to be sat there as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another thing that people perhaps don't want to talk about too freely is that there's a big risk when you buy new technology.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you're on that purchase side, therefore partnering with a group that have got some very trusted names in, big consultancies have been around for decades and decades and decades. Yeah. You do start to de-risk your purchase decision by partnering with those that have got subcontracted pieces.
Yeah.
And it does make the buying process easier in the long run.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. And I want to talk about the long run as well, because you've mentioned about transformation all the way through this, and we say transformation comes in many different boxes, from genuinely transformational and game-changing disruptive sort of plays through to a more evolutionary journey. And I think when you talk about a journey towards transformation, that's probably the right way to place it, right? So give us your insight on what to think about, how Encompass are able to help with that, what people would be thinking about when they embark on a transformation.
Yeah, so I think being clear about your end game is probably the most obvious opening statement, and then from there being realistic about what can be achieved with the resources available and in what time frame. And by resources, that cash is one of those resources. Of course. Capability is another one.
Capacity.
Yes, capability and capacity, absolutely right. And make no bones about it, the big banks that we sell into, they have got lots and lots of technology competing, drains on there, that fixed resource so competing for that is something you have to be really clear about. But just setting out a realistic path, and one of the things that we spend a bit of time, particularly if the client wants to achieve a perpetual KYC operating model, is it takes a number of years, minimum 18 months, probably nearer 36 months. Therefore, you need some executive sponsorship that is going to be prepared to wait. And knowing what I know about the ROI sort of demands on organisations.
Everyone wants it yesterday.
Everyone wants it yesterday. And 36 months is a damn long time for someone to wait for a return, which is why, being realistic.
Especially with tenures as well.
Yes, exactly. And, and that person could change 2 or 3 times in 3 years. So the organisation buying into it, not just having a personality-led change, which unfortunately many successful transformation programs have been driven by an individual. That's great, so long as that individual's there. As soon as they go, everyone goes, what was that for? I don't know, that was John's idea. Now what you have to do is it has to be our idea. So we spend a lot of time trying to work with clients to make sure that they've got that corporate buy-in over a sustained period.
Absolutely.
And we just try to make sure that they are as well prepared as possible to get into the cut and thrust of it. And being realistic about automation. People say they want to automate everything, but early stage conversation, pretty much you'll achieve 80% automation. There's going to be 20% that is too difficult. The return to achieve it is just not worth it. I mean, wake up and be realistic about that, rather than dream you could do 100% and then get disappointed you only get to 80. Those sorts of just transparent truths, really, that we
it's so important for people to think about that sort of thing as well, isn't it? And to go in open-minded and to recognise those timescales. I absolutely agree that organisational buy-in is incredibly important. And when you look at so many fragmented institutions, just about how difficult that is. And as you say, that there's someone who bought that, and we never really were into it, or wherever it goes. It's having a team there which is all bought into that transformation at the same time. I completely agree with it. And we've spoken about data a lot all the way through this, and I think you're as passionate as I am about the whole thing. But if we look at data as being key to delivering the benefits of all this, and we know that data still is an area there which I think people are learning about, albeit very quickly, but learning about the benefits of where it goes. Talk to us about the significance and the main character position of data within all of this.
I'll paint a couple of extremes on the spectrum of data. So we've got a client whose onboarding process if it was applicable, could have 2,000 different data attributes about an organisation. So that's the extreme case. Now you've got to gather that, and that's going to be full of a lot of friction, because you won't get 2,000 bits of data from the outside world. You have to go and bother the client for a lot of that.
Yeah.
And then you've got to keep that refreshed. So every couple of years, or would depend on the risk. In that case, it's probably every year you have to trouble the client for an awful lot of stuff, and that's just going to make it painful for everybody. Contrast that to another client who has taken a view of saying, right, let's strip the whole thing back to base, as we were saying earlier. They have got 200 things. So they've got 90% less data in their profile for the same type of client. And that 200, so they've stripped out a lot, and they've got down from 200 to probably a handful or 2 hands full of data attributes that they really, really care about. They're the critical, any change to that is a change of risk appetite for that, or risk assessment for that client. The other data attributes are interesting and may lead to something critical, but mostly they don't. And that's that separation and assessment of the data attributes and where you trust those data attributes to come from. That's the other part of it. Working out what you want and then where you're going to get it from.
Yeah.
That is the magic sauce to making this process less burdensome. And if you can do that and you overlay automation, then you're on the happy path. If you just try to, you imagine that client with the 2,000, you try to automate that, there's going to be an awful lot of stuff that falls out on the cutting room floor that needs to be picked up and dealt with manually. So everyone's going to be disappointed. You kind of set yourself up for failure. Yeah. So you've really got to re-engineer your process and the expected outcome before you start. And then you've got to start small and build it up. Yeah. So start with define client segments, territories where good data exists, learn, build trust in that decisioning software so that everybody can turn around and says, I want to go to make this next big step, and I've tested it thoroughly. People go, oh, I can see that. Yeah. Because if there's any chink of doubt, people will always stick for what we do today. Thank you very much.
Definitely. I think that trust is such an important part of it, and I think when you're looking at the the potential of AI and everything that everyone's talking about at the moment, trust is at the key for, and that comes back to exactly why cloud took so long to, it was forced onto the financial services sector, right? And that's where it had to take off, and then suddenly people start to do it. But where there is I think there's an old expression of where there's doubt, there is no doubt, and I think I like that sort of element to it. I think it's the fundamental part of a strong financial services world. But at the same sort of stage, if we can help people to make that decision making process as friction-free and as accurate as possible, then that's a really strong position to be in moving further forward. So I love all of this, Howard. I could talk about it for hours.
Thank you.
In terms of where we're going, but we're going to wrap up by talking about what's next for you guys. So Encompass are doing lots of really cool things at the moment. There's a lot going on in the business, and this is, as you've been talking about beforehand, represents a really strong proposition to go out to market for at the moment. But talk to us about this will be going out towards the sort of final segment of 2023. There's an exciting time, as we were saying beforehand, about what the next 6 to 12 months looks like in the industry. Tell us what's coming from Encompass, what's exciting out there.
So probably one of the most exciting pieces that we've got that will come out in the next 3 months is a joint go-to-market strategy that supports a sandbox environment for this PKYC solution.
Nice.
So it kind of takes it a step beyond vaporware. Lots of PowerPoint that says we're all working and holding hands with different vendors to an environment that's built and ready for people to actually test and see. I think that will be a major step forward because it actually...
It's ease of buying again.
It is. It comes exactly to that. You can put your data through an existing combination of components and see what the outcomes are. That enables you to validate it against your current process, and you'll build confidence really, really quickly. So I think that's probably the most exciting market-facing announcement. In the meanwhile, we are continuing our sales focus. We've got ongoing conversations with all of the big banks across the globe. We've got big North America presence now that's having some really powerful conversations with the biggest banks over there. Our Europe and UK model is probably more mature. Australia continues to build. That's where we started.
So many companies at the moment who I'm speaking to have those origins in Australia. It's a real hub of innovation, isn't it?
It is, yes. And I think, yes, it is. And it's a relatively small and contained market.
Yeah.
So if you have a USP, no one's going to be eating your lunch.
There's some really good businesses that have come out of there, for sure.
Yes, yeah. And they're a great bunch of people too.
Definitely, definitely, despite the ashes at the moment. We won't talk about that. Howard, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
So if you want to get in contact with me, it's Howard Wimpory at Encompass corporation.com, or find me on LinkedIn. There's only one of me on LinkedIn.
So we'll tag you in there.
Yeah, please do find me on there. Or if you're curious about Encompass, just look at the website, encompasscorporation.com.
Fantastic. Howard, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks
Thank
so much for coming in today.
Thanks, Toby.
And thank you all for watching. We will see you soon on another episode of FinTech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.